There is a version of Ayanokoji Kiyotaka that people think they know. He sits at the back of the classroom. He scores exactly 50 points on his exam. He does not seem to care about anything or anyone. He drifts through high school like a ghost who got lost on the way to somewhere more important. People who have heard of Classroom of the Elite but never read it tend to describe him in one of the two ways. Either he is a cold, emotionless genius who treats people like game pieces, or he is a try-hard, edgy protagonist with a god complex dressed up in a school uniform. Both of those readings are superficial. Both of them miss the point almost entirely. And what is genuinely frustrating is that the character sitting underneath those surface impressions is one of the most carefully constructed protagonists in the modern era of light novel fiction. A character built to ask something uncomfortable of the reader, transcending mere entertainment. Most characters in fiction are built to invite identification or admiration. The reader is meant to see themselves in the protagonist or to wish they could. Ayanokoji does not straightforwardly offer either. He is too alien to be easily relatable due to qualities like his emotional flatness, his distance from ordinary desire, his willingness to use people instrumentally, or create friction between the reader and character that a lesser story would sand down. Classroom of the Elite does not sand it down, but instead leans into it. Because the friction is not a flaw in the design. The friction is the design. The discomfort you feel watching Ayanokoji operate is the story working correctly. You are meant to find him compelling and a little wrong, and to wonder what the distance between those two feelings is made of. Consider what it means to be written as a question rather than a character. Fiction gives us protagonists who want things like power, love, revenge, redemption, survival. Their wanting is the engine of the story. Ayanokoji breaks this contract with the reader in an interesting way. He arrives at NHS without an engine. He does not want Class A. He does not want to prove anything. He does not want to have an enemy he is trying to defeat, or a wound he is trying to heal, at least not in any form he can recognize or articulate. He is a character who has every ordinary wanting trained out of him. And watching the series slowly restore that wanting, watching him discover what it is to want something personal and small and real is the quietly radical project underneath all the competition and strategy and chess piece maneuvering. Ayanokoji is not misrepresented in the way that a power scaling character might be, where people just get the numbers wrong or misremember an ability. He is misrepresented at the level of what he fundamentally is. What the author, Kinugasa Syougo, actually wrote is a question. Specifically, if you strip a human being of everything that makes them human, warmth, connection, desire, fear, love, and you do it from birth, deliberately, systematically as an experiment, then what comes out the other side? And the answer Classroom of the Elite proposes is both more hopeful and more tragic than the premise suggests. What comes out is not a monster. What comes out is a person who does not know he's a person yet. The series is also unusually patient about this. Classroom of the Elite is not a story that rushes to reveal its protagonist. It trusts that the small accumulation of evidence of small moments, telling choices, and quiet investments. That patience itself is a statement about what kind of story this is. It is not interested in the spectacle of Ayanokoji, it is interested in the archaeology of him. And that means the reader has to do some of the work, which is exactly the kind of relationship between text and the reader that produces something worth returning to. That is what this video is about. Not just what Ayanokoji can do, though we will get into that, but what he means. Why Kinugasa built him this way, what the school, the chess metaphor, the people around him, and even the way he narrates his own story are all doing thematically. Because when you look at this character correctly, when you actually press on the text rather than skim it, what you find is something a lot more human than a mere power fantasy. To understand Ayanokoji Kiyotaka, you have to start where he started, a sterile environment designed to eliminate the standard variables of human development. His very conception was a transactional, calculated event. His father, Atsuomi, was a self-made politician who viewed human beings strictly as assets or liabilities. To prove that systematic conditioning could entirely override hereditary pedigree, Atsuomi selected Mika, a hostess with no notable background, to be the biological mother. Mika was paid to relinquish all maternal claims, even naming the child Kiyotaka after a host she preferred. From his first month in an incubator, Kiyotaka was treated as proprietary data rather than a son. This clinical approach yielded an unexpected biological wildcard. The researchers themselves noted that neither of Kiyotaka's parents possessed exceptional intellect. Yet Kiyotaka exhibited cognitive capabilities that transcended the genetic limitation of his lineage. The scientists classified his genius as an irregular mutation. He was an anomaly who could survive and master an environment that systematically broke every other subject. This biological unpredictability made him the ultimate prize of his father's experiment, a biological blank slate optimized by ruthless engineering. That engineering took physical form in the 4th generation of the White Room, which was subjected to the newly designed beta curriculum. Developed by the researcher Suzukake Tanji, this program abandoned standard developmental boundaries. The explicit goal was the maximization of human capability through the systematic hollowing out of human emotion. In this environment, individual will, personal preferences, and emotional attachment were treated as structural failures. The children were processed like raw materials, pushed to complete under the constant threat of disposal. Kiyotaka's early adaptation to this environment was rapid and absolute. At age 2, he realized that crying produced no external response or comfort, leading him to abandon physical expression entirely to preserve physical energy. His survival instinct manifested as advanced lateral thinking. During a simple hand-guessing game for rewards, he ignored the proctor's closed hands and chose to point to the instructor's back, realizing that the system itself was a variable to be manipulated. By age 4, he was mastering high-level mathematics, linguistics, and martial arts, outstripping his peers by ever-widening margins. This rapid development allowed him to begin manipulating his own evaluation to manage the difficulty of the curriculum. At age 5, recognizing that the difficulty of the exams increased in proportion to the higher score, he began calculating his outputs to score exactly 80 points. This was the precise threshold required to maintain his standing, while avoiding placing extra pressure on his peers. When confronted by his father for cutting corners, Kiyotaka proposed submitting entirely empty papers, arguing that writing the answers was an inefficient use of the energy, since his absolute competence was already a proven variable. This early self-regulation established his lifelong habit of viewing academic performance as a system of constraints to be managed. His interaction with the other children further highlight his clinical detachment. A peer named Yuki retained her emotional expressiveness, serving as a direct contrast to Kiyotaka's emotional flatness. When Yuki failed an evaluation and was dragged away by instructors, she begged Kiyotaka for help. His response was characteristically direct, telling her she should have been prepared. Yet, he immediately defended her to the instructors using a purely systematic argument. He pointed out that her early physical test results were skewed by her early menstruation, a physiological factor the proctors had failed to record. His defense was driven by an insistence on objective accuracy rather than sentimental empathy. A similar detachment governed his relationship with Shiro, his primary rival in martial arts training. Unlike Kiyotaka, Shiro retained a desire for the outside world and eventually chose to drop out of the program voluntarily. Before leaving, Shiro invited Kiyotaka to escape with him, arguing that spending a decade in a white room was a purposeless existence. Kiyotaka declined the offer because the white room was the only reality he had ever known. He was unable to comprehend self-improvement or purpose outside of his strict, measurable framework. He bid Shiro farewell with the same level analytical gaze he applied to his daily examination. By age 9, the facility had to hire aggressive adult mercenaries to challenge him in physical combat, as he had easily defeated every internal instructor. During these violent sparring matches, researchers recorded a striking physiological anomaly. Kiyotaka's heart rate remained at a completely stable, resting pace. The conditioning had successfully severed his cognitive processing from his physical survival instincts. He fought without adrenaline, fear, or malice, viewing combat as a series of physical vectors to be neutralized. When he prepared to deliver a fatal strike to a defeated opponent, he stopped only because the instructors intervened, displaying a complete lack of personal bloodlust. His emotional hollowing was laid bare at age 14, when the White Room temporarily suspended operations due to political pressure. Outside the facility for the first time, Kiyotaka was brought to meet Yuki, who had suffered a severe psychological breakdown after her explosion. As she trembled and pleaded with him to stay with her, Kiyotaka turned away. He concluded that his presence would not aid her recovery, leaving her without a trace of hesitation or regret. He returned to the vehicle with his father, noting that seeing the outside world had changed nothing within him. His eventual enrollment at Tokyo Metropolitan Advanced Nutrition High School was a result of a tactical retreat by his father. Atsuomi was engaged in a high-stakes political conflict with rivals like Kijima, who championed their own elite educational system. With the White Room temporarily closed and under investigation, Atsuomi needed a secure sanctuary to hide his primary asset from public scrutiny and political espionage. ANHS, with its absolute isolation and unique point-based economy, provided the perfect shield. Atsuomi deployed his ally Tsukishiro to orchestrate Kiyotaka's placement within the school, structuring a 3-year window of concealment. The ultimate goal remained unchanged. Kiyotaka will be retrieved upon graduation to become the head instructor of the restarted White Room, eventually leveraging his optimized capabilities to secure political power for his father's faction. When Ayanokoji Kiyotaka stepped onto the campus in Volume 1, he arrived as a weapon parked in a schoolyard, carrying 14 years of absolute conditioning and deeply ingrained instinct to keep his true capabilities completely hidden. Upon entering Tokyo Metropolitan Advanced Nutrition High School, Ayanokoji Kiyotaka attempts to build a peaceful, completely unremarkable existence. The sterile white of his childhood is replaced by a sprawling, state-funded campus that promises absolute freedom. To a survivor of the White Room, this environment appears to be a sanctuary, a place where he can finally park the weapon he was trained to be and mimic the behavior of a normal teenager. However, his transition into this new world is immediately complicated by the school's underlying structure, which is designed to evaluate and exploit the very human vulnerabilities he was taught to suppress. The school Ayanokoji enters is itself a philosophical statement. Tokyo Metropolitan Advanced Nutrition High School, ANHS, is presented to incoming students with a very specific promise, that this institution gives all students equal opportunity and that where you end up is purely a reflection of your own merit and effort. Class A is a top, Class D is a bottom. The school provides private points, essentially a currency that students use for goods, services, and class mobility. The system is transparent, the rules are clear, and the promise is that anyone willing to work hard enough and be smart enough can rise. This is, of course, a lie, or rather, it is the specific kind of lie that meritocracy always tells, that the game is fair when the game was never designed to be fair, and that the people at the bottom are there because of choices rather than circumstances. Class D is populated by students who possess traits that the institution finds inconvenient: trauma, difficulty with authority, unconventional thinking, or simply personalities that do not fit neatly into a system built to reward compliance and performance on its own narrow terms. The students in Class D are not the worst students in the school. They are the students who do not perform well within the specific kind of evaluation that the school uses. There is a significant difference, and the series understands that difference even when the characters within it do not. For a Japanese audience and a Japanese person myself, this reads with particular sharpness. Japanese school culture, and by extension, corporate culture, is built on an almost identical meritocratic myth that the examination system is neutral, that the right effort produces the right result, and that where you end up in the hierarchy is a reflection of your own worth rather than your starting conditions. Kinugasa is not being subtle about this. The school is Japan in miniature. The class hierarchy is an employment hierarchy transported into adolescence. Class D is where the people who could not or would not perform within the existing framework are placed and told their problem is personal, their failure is individual, and that the path upward is simply a matter of trying harder within a system they did not design and do not control. The school also does something interesting within its own rules that the series unpacks slowly. The system is not actually fair even within its stated terms. The evaluations, the special tests, the point economy, all of these can be gained. All of them reward not just merit, but cunning, social capital, and the willingness to make strategic use of other people. The most successful students in Class A are not necessarily the most capable. They are the most capable at playing the institution's specific version of the game, which is a narrower and more particular thing. Ayanokoji recognizes this immediately. He was trained for a much more sophisticated version of the same game. The school's competition is, for him, like being asked to solve a problem he mastered years ago in a stripped-down form. Against all of this, there is something almost perverse and beautiful about the fact that Ayanokoji chooses Class D as his home. He did not accidentally end up there. Someone with his capabilities could have performed at any level on the entrance evaluation. He deliberately scored himself into the lowest class. And that choice to be among the discarded, the overlooked, and the underestimated is one of the first real things we learn about what kind of person he actually is. Underneath everything the White Room tried to make him into. He could be at the top, but he put himself at the bottom. Whatever logic is driving that choice, it is not the logic of pure optimization. The illusion of a peaceful high school life shatters at the end of the first month, when Class D's point balance is reduced to 0 due to their collective slacking. This sudden drop exposes the reality of the school's hierarchy and introduces the immediate threat of explosion for the lowest performing students. When Kensudo faces explosion after failing the midterm English exam by a single point, Kiyotaka is forced to make his first quiet intervention. Rather than acting openly, he navigates the system's margins by purchasing past exam papers from an upperclassman and having Kushida distribute them to the class. When Sudo still falls short, Kiyotaka negotiates with their homeroom teacher, Sai Chabashira, using his own private points to literally buy the missing test point and prevent the explosion. The 50-point average is a detail that most cleanly encapsulates what is interesting about Ayanokoji as a construction, and it rewards more thought than it usually gets. He is capable of perfect scores. He is capable of academic performance that would mark him as the most exceptional student in the institution. It is an act of extraordinary self-discipline in the service of appearing to have no discipline at all. The effort required to be consistently mediocre when you are capable of being consistently excellent is actually quite high, and almost nobody notices it, which is exactly the point. There is also something else happening in this choice that connects to a deeper anxiety this series is exploring. The White Room made Ayanokoji exceptional by stripping everything else away. His capability is inseparable from his damage. To fully display what he can do is, in some sense, to put the White Room on display to be publicly the thing that was made in that place. And there is something in him that does not want that. Not just strategically, something more like revulsion. The 50 points represent a quiet refusal to be the experiment in public, serving as a tactical camouflage, a quiet, persistent refusal to be the experiment in public. This is where the series starts to complicate any readings of Ayanokoji as simply as a power fantasy. A power fantasy says, look at what I can do. Ayanokoji's actual posture is, do not look at what I can do. He is not performing modestly. He is not secretly waiting for the moment of revelation with enjoyment. He is genuinely more comfortable being average. Not because average is safe, though it is, but because average is, in some deep and barely articulable sense, closer to what he wants to be. A person. Just a person in a classroom doing enough to pass. The 50 points are the most honest thing about him, more honest than any of his strategic masterstrokes, because they are what he chooses for himself when he's not choosing for a reason. The unfortunate darkness that follows even his most human choices like this one is that he doesn't understand what average is. So while he scores 50 to appear average, he ends up answering very difficult questions and failing easy ones, further showing his lack of understanding of the normal world. Also, something to be said here about what the hiding reveals about the school itself. A system built on meritocratic transparency on the idea that performance should be visible and rewarded is one in which a person of genuine exceptional ability has to hide in order to be safe. Ayanokoji already spent his whole life being treated as an asset because of his abilities. He has no interest in repeating the experience in a different building with different paperwork. The 50-point performance is also, in a strange way, an act of solidarity. It puts himself among the unremarkable. It makes him a classmate rather than a standard. When a class competes as a unit, which ANHS requires constantly, a god at the top of the hierarchy is not a teammate. A person in the middle of it, capable of lifting the floor rather than sitting at the ceiling, is what the class needs. Ayanokoji's mediocrity is, however, unconsciously arrived at a form of belonging. He chose a class that needed him and the school that made him theirs. Classroom of the Elite is narrated in first person. We are inside Ayanokoji's head for the entire series. This should, in theory, make him the most transparent character in the story. We have access to his thoughts, his calculations, his assessments. In practice, it makes him the most opaque. because what he tells us is almost never the thing that matters most, and doing it in a voice so analytically confident that you can read 40 pages before you notice the shape of what is being withheld. He will narrate in precise and often beautiful detail his analysis of another character's psychology. He will tell you what Horikita is afraid of, what Kushida is hiding, and what the opposing class leader is planning 3 moves ahead. He'll describe these things with the cool confidence of someone who finds social dynamics as legible as mathematics. What he will not tell you is how he feels about any of it. The series makes it increasingly clear that he experiences emotions, yet he lacks a functional relationship with his own emotional interior. He's willing to understand others, but not himself. This makes him an unreliable narrator in a very specific and interesting way. He's not lying to us, he's not constructing a false picture of events. He's simply narrating around the parts of the picture that he does not have access to, or he cannot bear to look at directly. When something affects him, when Kei says something that lands somewhere real, when he watches Horikita achieve something he helped engineer, when he is alone and the performance of indifference has no audience, the narration goes quiet in a particular way. It describes actions, it describes surroundings, but it does not describe what is happening inside. The prose goes from rich and analytical to spare and observational, and if you are reading carefully, that shift is itself data. There is also the question of tone. Ayanokoji's narration is characteristically level precise, slightly detached, observational in a way that reads almost clinical. This tone never breaks, not even in moments that would produce dramatic vocal shifts in a different kind of protagonist. When he's in danger, the tone stays level. When someone he cares about is threatened, the tone stays level. Yet within that level tone, there are micro variations that a careful reader learns to track. A slightly longer pause before naming a person, a choice to describe physical sensation rather than emotional state, a sentence that starts analytical and ends somewhere else entirely before he can catch it. They are not artistic accidents. They are the fingerprints of a narrator who cannot tell you what he feels but cannot quite hide it either. Kinugasa is doing something quite sophisticated here as a novelist. He has built a narrator whose blind spot is himself, and then he has structured the series so that every relationship, every competition, every confrontation slowly forces things into that blind spot's vicinity and makes the narrator have to deal with them. The reader sees it before Ayanokoji does. The reader notices the pattern, the investment, the protectiveness, the choices that only make sense if something more than strategy is operating before the narrator acknowledges them. It creates a very particular reading experience. Watching a person discover their own interiority through the gaps in what they are willing to say out loud. It is one of the more demanding tricks a novelist can pull off, and Kinugasa pulls it off consistently enough that it has to be intentional. This is a technique that requires a great deal of patience from the writer and the reader. It will be much easier and much less interesting to simply give Ayanokoji a moment of explicit emotional revelation and let him articulate what he has been feeling. Kinugasa largely refuses this. The discoveries, when they come through action and implication rather than a statement. They come through what he does rather than what he says. This is consistent with who he is, someone who has been trained to distrust emotional decoration, from whom the idea of stating a feeling plainly is essentially foreign, and is also, structurally, one of the reasons the series is worth reading carefully rather than skimming for plot. The plot is functional and frequently excellent, but the character is in their margins. The second volume shifts the focus from academic survival to social conflict and personal performance. When Tsudo is framed for a physical altercation by Class C, Kiyotaka is forced to secure a witness to prevent his classmate's suspension. This search introduces Airi Sakura, a shy student who captured photos of the incident. Airi's double life as Shizuku, a popular gravure idol hiding behind thick glasses and a plain mask, serves as a direct parallel to Kiyotaka's own defensive posturing. Both characters wear clumsy, deliberate disguises to protect themselves from an intrusive world. To resolve the crisis without drawing attention to himself, Kiyotaka coordinates with Class B's Honami Ichinose to construct a highly effective bluff. They installed fake security cameras in the hallway where the fight occurred, successfully pressure Class C into withdrawing their complaint, and later used targeted tracking and photos to neutralize Airi's stalker. Despite demonstrating his profound capacity for systematic and psychological manipulation, Kiyotaka remains determined to protect his anonymity. He flatly rejects Student Council President Manabu Horikita's offer to join the Student Council, choosing to retreat back into the comfortable safety of Class D's shadow. The boundaries of this high school sandbox are thoroughly tested in Volume 3 during the island survival test. This exam shifts the battlefield from the classroom to a primitive wilderness, immediately testing the school's definition of merit. In this environment, academically weak students like Ike and Sudo, who possesses practical camping and physical coordination skills, become the class's most valuable assets. This shift validates Kiyotaka's childhood training. Capability is entirely contextual, and a rigid evaluation system will always overlook unconventional talent. The island test also introduces direct espionage to the C-class spy, Ibuki Mio. While his classmates accept Ibuki into their camp, Kiyotaka silently tracks her movements, noting her micro-behaviors and anticipating her theft of the class's keycard. When Karuizawa's underwear is stolen and planted in Ike's bag to sow discord, Kiyotaka quietly takes the evidence and hands it to Hirata, allowing the class leader to manage the fallout while he focuses on the larger strategic picture. The climax of the test occurs in the midst of a heavy storm. With Horikita Suzune collapsing from a severe fever, Kiyotaka executes a ruthless, multi-layered counter-strategy. He forces her physical retirement from the test to prevent Class D from suffering leader guessing penalties, secretly takes the leader card for himself, and manipulates the final guessing phase to secure a stunning first-place victory for his class. The triumph on the island, however, is immediately recontextualized by Kiyotaka's internal thoughts as he carries the unconscious Horikita back to the ship. In one of the most significant revelations of the early series, his level narration strips away any pretense of developing empathy. But unfortunately, Horikita, there's one thing that's definitely wrong. Only now, at this moment, let me tell you in all honesty, I have never thought you as a friend or an ally. I've never cared about you as a classmate. In this world, winning is everything. The process to do so does not matter. I do not care what the cost is. I'm totally fine as long as in the end, I have my victory. You, Hirata, and everyone else are only the tools for that. This cold internal declaration reframes his actions across the first 3 volumes. His interventions were not acts of developing altruism, but the calculated maneuvers of a survivor securing his environment. The sanctuary of high school has not softened the weapon, it has simply provided a more complex sandbox for its operation. The second phase of Ayanokoji Kiyotaka's high school career marks the end of his passive isolation, blackmailed by Saichabashira, who threatens him with expulsion by claiming his father is actively seeking his removal. Kiyotaka is forced to coordinate his class's strategies from the shadows. This period of intense tactical maneuver exposes his profound cognitive modeling capabilities and initiates a deep, slow erosion of his emotional armor through his relationship with Kei Karuizawa. Discussions of Ayanokoji's intelligence often focuses on a repetitive list of achievements, such as outmaneuvering a rival or predicting an event several moves ahead. While indicative of his capabilities, these lists reveal very little about his methodology. The true interest lies in how his mental machinery operates and what it reveals about his character. His intelligence functions as a systematic method rather than a simple numerical score, and understanding this analytical approach reframes his entire trajectory. Instead of merely analyzing situations, Ayanokoji simulates the people within them. While typical fictional geniuses process environmental data and react, Ayanokoji builds dynamic models of everyone around him, mapping their psychology, desires, blind spots, and breaking points. He then projects these models forward in time, calculating the actions of specific individuals based on their unique traits so that events naturally follow from those actions. His analysis of Kushida Kikyo across the first semester illustrates this cognitive modeling in practice. Drawing on minor, easily overlooked anomalies, he constructs a complete psychological profile without her knowledge. He first registers the acquisition of anomalous information when Kushida somehow knows Horikita's full name on the second day of school, despite Horikita's aggressive self-isolation and refusal to introduce herself to anyone except Suro. During their initial interactions, Kushida repeatedly attempts to anchor conversations in the past, referencing junior high dynamics during the swimming pool and cafe setups, to test whether Horikita recognizes her. He applies Edward Hall's proxemic categories to her movements, noting that Kushida lacks personal intimate zone boundaries with acquaintances, yet is met with stark physical attraction and evasion by Airi Sakura, who instinctively senses a contradiction in Kushida's demeanor. From these patterns, Ayanokoji infers a historical connection to a catastrophic middle school incident. He diagnoses Kushida with a grandiose form of narcissistic personality disorder, recognizing that her extreme social altruism is a calculated method to acquire personal secrets as social leverage. Modeling her psychological limit, he calculates that the cognitive dissonance between her public angelic persona and her internal contempt generates an unsustainable level of mental strain. He reasons that her coping mechanism must involve a physical, unmonitored discharge of stress. To observe this firsthand, he organizes a study group with uncooperative classmates, predicting that the frustration of dealing with Sudo, Ike, Yamauchi, combined with Horikita's abrasive dismissal, will force Kushida to seek immediate isolation to vent, allowing him to trail her and witness her true nature. This systemic predictive logic reaches its peak during the paper shuffle exam in Volume 6. Recognizing that Kushida has aligned with Kakeru Ryuuen to engineer Horikita's expulsion, Ayanokoji reverse engineers their betrayal. He allows Kushida to dictate a high-stakes bet with Horikita, knowing her grandiosity will blind her to the trap. During a strategic study session at a karaoke bar, he has Karuizawa orchestrate a staged spill incident, deliberately staining Kushida's blazer. This physical interaction allows Karuizawa to plant a cheat sheet on Kushida, providing Kiyotaka with a devastating counter-blackmail mechanism. To isolate Ryuuen from external support, Ayanokoji spreads rumors about Ichinose's private points in Ryuuen's name in Volume 6, calculating that Class B's Ryuji Kanzaki will be forced to sever his secret strategic alliance with Ryuuen to protect his own standing, while simultaneously diverting Sakayanagi Arisu's attention toward Class B to buy Ayanokoji time. Through these calculations, he ensures a complete victory over Class C without ever stepping onto the public stage. This cognitive modeling is not limited to his enemies. It is the exact mechanism he uses to recruit his most valuable assets. The Zodiac exam on the cruise ship in Volume 4 introduces Kei Karuizawa as a psychological puzzle. Through careful observation, Kiyotaka identifies Karuizawa's fundamental survival mechanism. She acts as a parasite, attaching herself to dominant social figures like Yousuke Hirata to shield herself from the trauma to her severe junior high school bullying. Kiyotaka decides to systematically deconstruct and rebuild her psychology to serve his own ends. During the Zodiac exam, he identifies her conflict with Shiho Manabe and her Class C peers. Instead of protecting her, he anonymous messages Manabe, orchestrating a confrontation at the lowest, unmonitored level of the ship. He watches from the shadows as Manabe and her friends physically abuse Karuizawa, allowing her to reach her absolute breaking point. Once her social shield is completely destroyed and Hirata's inability to protect her is laid bare, Kiyotaka steps out of the shadows. He pins her against a wall, exposes his knowledge of her past, and offers her a chilling contract: absolute protection from bullying and exposure in exchange for her complete, unconditional obedience as his tool. Karuizawa, desperate for a host to guarantee her survival, accepts the terms. He cements this psychological capture during the summer break in Volume 4.5, coordinating with her to foil a peeping plan by the Class D boys, showing her that his eyes are always on her and that her survival is entirely dependent on his goodwill. The sports festival in Volume 5 forces Kiyotaka to balance his concealment with the chaotic reality of physical competition. Ryuuen, having obtained the Class D's leaked participation table from Kushida, systematically targets Horikita Suzune to crush her spirit and expose Class D's shadow coordinator. Kiyotaka deliberately allows Horikita to suffer these physical and psychological fouls, calculating that her defeat is a necessary developmental shock to break her self-isolation and force her to cooperate with Sudo. When Sudo abandons the class in a fit of rage, it is Horikita who must retrieve him, representing her first step toward genuine leadership. In the final, high-stakes 1,200-meter relay, Kiyotaka is forced to step in as Sudo's replacement, leading to an extraordinary, full-throttle race against student council president Manabu Horikita. This brief display of superhuman physical capability immediately draws the attention of dangerous observers, including Arisu Sakayanagi, who confronts him at the gate and reveals her knowledge of his White Room origin, declaring her intention to destroy his father's greatest masterpiece. the tension reaches a freezing point in Volume 7. During this period of high anxiety, Kiyotaka is summoned to the principal's office, where he meets his father, Atsuomi, for the first time in 18 months. Atsuomi reveals that Kiyotaka's former butler, Matsuo, committed suicide after being systematically ruined by Atsuomi as punishment for helping Kiyotaka escape. This meeting reinforces Kiyotaka's deep emotional detachment. He processes the news of Matsuo's tragic death without a single flicker of grief, viewing it as a natural consequence of rebelling against his father's absolute authority. However, the meeting also allows him to identify a critical gap in Chabashira's blackmail. Through a subsequent conversation with Chairman Sakayanagi, Kiyotaka discovers that his father never actively ordered his expulsion through her. Realizing she lied to manipulate him, he ruthlessly strips Chabashira of her leverage, leaving her pathetically bound to his mercy. With his obligation to reach Class A suddenly dissolved, Kiyotaka decides to return to a life of absolute obscurity. To do this, he must sever his connection with his most valuable asset. He contacts Karuizawa and coldly informs her that their transactional relationship is over, telling her to delete all traces of their communication. This deliberate abandonment is a calculated psychological test. By throwing her back into her post-traumatic anxiety right as Ryuuen narrows his search for X down to her, Kiyotaka tests the absolute limits of her loyalty. The climax occurs on the freezing, isolated rooftop of the school. Ryuuen and his lackeys corner Karuizawa, pouring buckets of freezing water over her to break her spirit and force her to reveal the identity of the mastermind. Despite the physical torture and the profound terror of her past returning, Karuizawa experiences a profound internal shift. Karuizawa chooses to protect Kiyotaka's identity even at the cost of her own social survival. She realizes that her relationship with him, though born of pure utility, has given her the strength to face her past. She refuses to betray him, choosing loyalty over safety. At her moment of absolute despair, Kiyotaka arrives on the rooftop. He does not act out of a heroic rush of passion. His intervention is a clinical, calculated neutralization of a threat. He systematically dismantles Ryuen's physical enforcers, Ishizaki, Yamada Albert, and Ibuki Mio, with the same stable, resting heart rate observed during his childhood training. When Ryuen attempts to assert that violence and fear are the ultimate force of control, Kiyotaka delivers a brutal, one-sided beatdown, explaining that fear only works on those who can conceive of their own defeat. Having witnessed the complete destruction of human souls in the White Room, Kiyotaka's mind is entirely empty of the vulnerability required to feel fear. This rooftop confrontation permanently shifts the dynamic of the series. Ryuen's spirit is thoroughly broken, and he is forced to step down as Class C's leader. More importantly, the relationship between Kiyotaka and Karuizawa undergoes a profound, quiet evolution. This shift is explored during the Christmas holidays during Volume 7.5. Kiyotaka is invited on a double date with Maya Sato, Karuizawa, and Hirata. When Sato confesses her love to him, Kiyotaka rejects her. He recognizes that Sato is a normal girl who seeks a normal, healthy romance. An emotional experience his White Room programming renders him incapable of providing. Instead, his thoughts remain anchored on Karuizawa. On Christmas night, he meets her behind the school building. He gives her a drugstore bag containing cold medicine, having observed her setting up the double date on a freezing afternoon. For the first time, he officially designates her as his partner, asking for her continued assistance in his upcoming shadow war against the new student council president, Miyabi Nagumo. As they stand in the falling snow, Kiyotaka begins calling her by her given name, Kei. In this quiet moment, the clinical calculation of the White Room begins to give way to a fragile, unquantifiable human preference. Kei has transitioned from a disposable tool to an indispensable presence in his life, marking the first real crack in the mask of Ayanokoji Kiyotaka. The third semester of Ayanokoji Kiyotaka's first year at Advanced Nurturing High School represents a significant escalation in systemic danger. The transition of student council power from Manabu Horikita to Miyabi Nagumo introduces a highly aggressive, purely meritocratic regime that actively encourages expulsions. No longer shielded by absolute obscurity, Kiyotaka is forced to navigate complex, multi-layered exams that test both his clinical tactical machinery and his emerging human connections. During this phase, his actions transition from isolated survival maneuvers to a deliberate testing of the boundaries of his environment, culminating in a literal chess match against Arisu Sakayanagi and a profound shift in his relationship with Kei Karuizawa. The mixed training camp in Volume 8 establishes this atmosphere of collective pressure. Forced to form gender-based groups across all 3 school years, the student must cooperate to avoid a collective failure that will result in the expulsion of their group leader. Kiyotaka enters this camp with the intention of remaining a passive observer, yet he is continually drawn into the gears of the exam. He witnesses the ruthless execution of Nagumo's strategies, which result in the targeted expulsion of Manabu's secretary, Akane Tachibana. He also observes Rokusuke Koenji's highly independent plan to secure 20 million private points from graduating 3rd years in exchange for real-world cash, a financial bypass of the school's meritocratic system that Nagumo quickly moves to suppress. This period of cold utility is immediately followed by a targeted psychological assault on Class B's leader, Honami Ichinose, in Volume 9. Arisu Sakayanagi launches a devastating slander campaign, plastering the school forum with letters declaring Ichinose a criminal. This systemic harassment is designed to exploit Ichinose's fundamental weakness, her absolute honesty and deep-seated guilt over a past middle school shoplifting incident. As Ichinose retreats into her dorm room, collapsing under the weight of her resurrected trauma, Class B's legendary unity begins to fracture. Kiyotaka's intervention during this crisis is uniquely structured, demonstrating his deep understanding of human psychology. He rejects the standard passive method of offering gentle comfort, recognizing that empty reassurance would only prolong her suffering. Instead, he visits her room daily during his lunch breaks, sitting on the floor with his back against her closed door, letting his silent, physical presence speak for him. By acting as a literal, sturdy door, he provides her with a safe, unmonitored space to release her past. He pressures her into confronting her guilt, helping her realize that everyone possesses the right to be forgiven. This intervention successfully heals her spirit, allowing her to return to school and publicly declare her past to her classmates, neutralizing Sakayanagi's campaign and cementing Class B's absolute loyalty to her. The brutal reality of the school's culling mechanism reaches its peak in Volume 10 with the sudden announcement of the class poll. This exam forces each class to cast praise and censure votes within their own ranks, guaranteeing that the student with the lowest net score will be immediately expelled. Recognizing Kiyotaka as her absolute prey, Sakayanagi secretly manipulates Haruki Yamauchi into organizing a large group conspiracy to target him with criticism votes. This backstage betrayal is exposed in a dramatic class confrontation by Horikita Suzune, who presents objective evidence of Yamauchi's collusion with Class A, leading to Yamauchi's absolute social ruin and subsequent explosion. The class poll claims another victim in the psychological lapse of Yousuke Hirata. Unable to bear the reality of sacrifice, Hirata's ideal of protecting everyone is completely shattered, causing him to lash out at his classmates and fall into a state of deep despair. Kiyotaka's reconstruction of Hirata's mind is an exercise in calculated, therapeutic brutality. Meeting the broken leader on a secluded bench, Kiyotaka rejects any form of gentle sympathy. Instead, he applies unbearable psychological pressure, labeling Hirata as an incompetent, weak student who can only talk about things he cannot do. By forcing Hirata to confront his baseline limitations, Kiyotaka breaks down his messiah complex, helping him realize that he can rely on others to carry the weight of the class. This destructive rebuilding successfully restores Hirata as a vital, highly adaptive pillar of Class D. In the same exam, Kiyotaka engineers the strategic rescue of Kakeru Ryuuen, who has resigned himself to expulsion. Recognizing that Ryuuen is an essential variable to keep the sandbox competitive, Kiyotaka coordinates a secret, multi-class transaction. He convinces Ibuki and Ishizaki to transfer Ryuuen's hoarded private points to Class B, which Ichinose uses to save Ryuji Kanzaki from a potential deficit. In exchange, Class B casts their praise votes for Ryuuen, saving him from expulsion and resulting in the sacrifice of Shiho Manabe instead. This preservation of Ryuuen ensures that a powerful, highly disruptive force remains in the environment to challenge Sakayanagi and Nagumo in the future. The climax of the first year occurs in Volume 11 with the event selection exam. Chess is chosen as the final, deciding event of the match between Class A and Class C, bringing the series' primary strategic metaphor into the physical world. For Kiyotaka, this match represents a direct, highly anticipated confrontation with Sakayanagi. The rules allow the commanders of each class to intervene via headset during the game, transforming the match into a proxy war between the two exceptionally analytical minds. The actual execution of the exam, however, exposes the limits of the chess metaphor. While chess is a closed system with absolute unchanging rules, the school is an open sandbox subject to the arbitrary interference of corrupt authority. As Horikita Suzune battles Masayoshi Hashimoto, Kiyotaka and Sakayanagi take control of the board as commanders, executing a flawless, professional-level match that leaves the proctors in absolute disbelief. Yet, at the moment of Kiyotaka's impending victory, acting director Tsukishiro directly interferes, using the school's computer system to alter Kiyotaka's final command to Horikita. This physical breach of the rules forces Class C into an artificial defeat. This compromise of his sanctuary forces Kiyotaka to seek an unmonitored resolution. Following the exam, he meets Sakayanagi in the library, where she has set up a chessboard to complete the match from the moment before Tsukishiro's interference. Free from corporate manipulation, Kiyotaka demonstrates his absolute mastery, securing a decisive victory. For Sakayanagi, this defeat brings a profound sense of satisfaction, fulfilling her lifelong desire to test her natural-born talent against the greatest masterpiece of the White Room. She reaches out and holds his hand, telling him that human warmth is a precious thing, a tactile, emotional message that directly challenges his sterile, utilitarian worldview. The graduation ceremony in Volume 11.5 serves as a massive developmental catalyst for Horikita Suzune, marking a critical evolution in Kiyotaka's relationship with her. As Manabu prepares to leave the school, Suzune cuts her long hair short, symbolically releasing her childhood imitation of her brother and stepping into her own independent identity. Manabu's parting words to Kiyotaka reveal a profound intuition. He believes that Kiyotaka is hiding enormous capability and urges him to leave a permanent mark on the hearts of the students around him. Kiyotaka's investment in Suzune's growth transitioned from tactical preservation to a genuine desire to see her develop into a worthy peer. To test her newly reclaimed self-reliance, he proposes a wager on the upcoming written exam. Suzune is allowed to choose any single subject on the day of the test, and they'll compete for the higher mark. If she wins, he will stop hiding his abilities and dedicate his full effort to reaching Class A. If he wins, she must join the student council to challenge Nagumo's regime. By setting up this bet, Kiyotaka quietly moves the board to give her room to develop. He acts out of a deep-seated wish to see her succeed, preparing her to lead the class as an independent leader rather than a shield for his anonymity. This period of transition is accompanied by the emergence of new, highly dangerous variables. Chiaki Matsushita, a highly capable student who has been hiding her academic and physical abilities, begins tracking Kiyotaka. By observing his movements and his close proximity to dominant figures like Kei and Hirata, Matsushita deduces his true nature, confronting him about his hidden intellectual capacity. Concurrently, Tsukishiro delivers a chilling warning. A student from the White Room has been enrolled in the incoming first-year class. This announcement permanently shatters Kiyotaka's hope of a peaceful baseline, forcing him to prepare for an inevitable, high-stakes conflict against a product of his own past. Faced with the approaching storm of the second year, Kiyotaka decides to take a profound, experimental step into the common, emotional world his father deemed frivolous. On spring break, he calls Kei Karuizawa to his room. Kei, still feeling the lingering anxiety of their transactional arrangement and her recent breakup with Hirata, arrives in a defensive, highly insecure state of mind. Kiyotaka directly confesses his love to her. As she shudders and struggles to process his words, he gently embraces her, marking the official beginning of their romantic relationship. Kiyotaka's internal monologue during this embrace reveals the complex, highly contradictory nature of his character. Humans find pleasure in learning. Whether it is academic, sports, or games, they enjoy ascending. Romance is the same. I do not know romantic love, nor do I know family love, not shame, nor pleasure. I believe I will experience it in the future, but nothing will change. It is only learning, growing up and moving on. It can be said that Kei is just the name of a study book about the opposite sex. This chilling, analytical assessment frames the relationship as a necessary learning exercise designed to foster Kei's growth to stop her from behaving as a parasite. Yet, even as his white room programming calculates her eventual disposal, his underlying humanity harbors a quiet, desperate hope for a different outcome. Or maybe, a future where that doesn't happen is waiting. Maybe she'll become an existence he can't leave behind. Kiyotaka himself does not understand. There is a part of him that is wishing and another part of him that knows it is impossible. Kiyotaka wishes for it, but at the moment that he is smiling while hugging his dearest. As he holds Kei in the falling snow, Ayanokoji Kiyotaka is caught between the cold, predictive machinery of his childhood and a fragile, deeply human desire to be changed by the person in his arms. The masterpiece of the White Room has begun to learn the language of the heart, praying for his own defeat at the hands of the very emotion he was designed to never understand. The transition into the second year at Tokyo Metropolitan Advanced Nurturing High School marks a significant acceleration in the external pressure acting upon Ayanokoji Kiyotaka. The arrival of a new freshman class, coupled with the active intervention of acting director Tsukishiro, dismantles the temporary safety of his high school life. This phase is characterized by high-stakes shadow war, where Kiyotaka is forced to navigate targeted explosions, a school-wide bounty on his head, and direct physical confrontation with products of the White Room. The academic year begins in Year 2 Volume 1, with the introduction of the school's new evaluation system, the Overall Ability App. This public ranking of every student's academic and physical capabilities makes Kiyotaka's concealment highly difficult. In the inaugural special exam, a partnership-based written test where the second years must pair with the first years, Tsukishiro installs a massive, hidden incentive. Any first-year student who successfully expels Kiyotaka will be awarded 20 million private points. To force a pairing, Kiyotaka is confronted by the brutal Class 1D representative Hosen Kazomi. Hosen attempts to execute a high-stakes frame job, bringing a pocket knife to a secluded meeting behind the dorms with the intention of stabbing his own thigh to accuse Kiyotaka of assault. Recognizing the trap through prior intelligence, Kiyotaka rushes forward. Instead of dodging, he drives his left hand directly onto the blade, gripping the sharp steel with his bare palm to physically prevent Hosen from completing his self-inflicted wound. By sacrificing his physical safety to secure a defensive counter-blackmail hold over Hosen, Kiyotaka forces the violent freshman into a strategic partnership, demonstrating his clinical willingness to use his own body as an instrument of calculation. No character in the second year holds up a more precise mirror to Kiyotaka than Ichika Amasawa, introduced in Volume 1 as the accomplice who purchased the framing knife for Hosen. Ichika's origins are rooted in the same stereo engineering that produced Kiyotaka. Born through in vitro fertilization to highly talented parents, she represents the elite 5th generation conditioning of the White Room. The difference in their outcome is profound. While the White Room's brutal conditioning hollowed out Kiyotaka's emotional interior, Ichika managed to retain a genuine, highly expressive warmth. She displays a playful curiosity about the common world, taking pleasure in mundane experiences, such as walking in the sun, cooking, and listening to high school gossip that the facility originally sought to train out of her. She understands manipulation as a first language, navigating social spaces with the same unhurried clarity that Kiyotaka possesses. Yet, she chooses to wear her extraordinary capabilities lightly. Structurally, Ichika represents a possibility that the White Room's dehumanizing output was a choice made by its creators rather than an inevitable consequence of the training. She is what Kiyotaka might have been if his development had allowed room for human affection. In Volume 2, she boldly intrudes on Kiyotaka's indoor date with Kei, teasing the couple and dropping a contraceptive device on the table as a provocative apology gift. Her behavior is fueled by a deep, almost religious admiration for Kiyotaka, whom she views as the ultimate masterpiece. She positions herself as a protector rather than his enemy, choosing to watch him from afar as an admirer even as she is branded a failure by the facility for her disobedience. While Ichika serves as a mirror of what Kiyotaka lost, Nanase Tsubasa enters the narrative as a direct moral challenge to its existence. Nanase is a wound, arriving at the school with a verdict already in hand. In the prologue of Volume 3, she reveals her connection to Matsuo Eiichiro, the son of Kiyotaka's former butler. Eiichiro's life was systematically destroyed by Atsuomi's relentless harassment following Kiyotaka's escape, eventually driving both Matsuo and his son to suicide. To Nanase, Kiyotaka's peaceful existence at the school is a curse built on the graves of the people she loved. During the grueling 2-week uninhabited island exam in Volume 3 and 4, Nanase accompanies Kiyotaka, offering to assist him while quietly biding her time. The climax of her campaign occurs on the 7th day of the test in Area D3. She guides him into a difficult, isolated mountain pass, attempting to force his physical withdrawal from the exam. During their physical confrontation, she unleashes her alternate personality, assuming the identity of Eiichiro to justify her violence. Kiyotaka, however, remains completely untroubled. He mentally and physically deconstructs her, dodging every blow with minimal effort and explaining that her attacks can never reach him. He shows her the complete futility of her vengeance, forcing her to realize that her anger is a desperate attempt to run from her own feelings of helplessness. Once her vengeful drive is broken, Kiyotaka offers her a different path, inviting her to cooperate with him to protect his place at the school, the very sanctuary her childhood friend sacrificed his life to secure. Nanase accepts his hand, transforming from a vengeful executor into his loyal ally. Yet, even as she pledges her absolute devotion to him, Kiyotaka's internal monologue remains chillingly level, as he immediately begins measuring her future usefulness as a tool. Amidst the exhausting survival metrics of the island exam, the emotional core of his C1 development with Kei Karuizawa finds its physical confrontation. On the 4th day of the test, Kiyotaka and Kei meet in secret, deep within the forest, far away from the watchful eyes of their peers. Observing her profound anxiety regarding his close partnership with Nanase, Kiyotaka realizes that verbal reassurance is inefficient to calm her insecurities. To replace her post-traumatic reliance on a protective host with an absolute trust in him, he pulls her close and kisses her on the lips. The first kiss, occurring under the shadow of a high-stakes exam, represents a massive, tactile shift in his development. He notes the unexpected softness of her lips and the quiet desire for the interaction to last longer, demonstrating that her presence has begun to cultivate a genuine emotional preference within him. The final days of the island test bring the external threats to a violent head. Tsubaki Sakurako coordinates a massive first-sea siege to corner Kiyotaka, which is successfully neutralized by a counter-offensive organized by Sakayanagi Arisu, who deploys the second-years to block the first-sea's movements. However, when Kiyotaka reaches the final designated area at I-2 on the beach, he is met by acting director Tsukishiro and Shiba-sensei, who have prepared a boat to forcibly retire and retrieve him. Tsukishiro has disabled the local GPS surveillance, creating a complete blind spot to execute a physical abduction. The ensuing 2v1 battle on the sandy beach forces Kiyotaka to fight for his physical survival. Tsukishiro and Shiba coordinate their attacks, using the unstable terrain to exhaust his stamina. Kiyotaka is forced to experience a flicker of tactile panic, as he realizes Shiba possesses physical strength comparable to his own. This ambush is interrupted by the arrival of Kiryuuen Fuka, a highly independent third-year student who assists him by holding off Shiba, allowing Kiyotaka to engage Tsukishiro 1v1. To permanently end the threat, Kiyotaka's preemptive strategy takes effect. He had previously requested Sakayanagi to report a fake double collapse at I-2, forcing the neutral teachers Sai Chabashira and Mashima to arrive via rescue boat to investigate. Faced with authoritative adult witness, Tsukishiro is forced to withdraw, admitting defeat and formally stepping down as acting director. The island exam concludes with Koenji securing first place overall, successfully protecting Class D's points while Kiyotaka secures his continued safety at the school. The aftermath of the exam is explored during the cruise ship vacation in Volume 4.5. During a late-night meeting in a deserted concert hall, Kiyotaka plays the piano, drawing the attention of both Chabashira and a departing Tsukishiro. Tsukishiro, formally dismissed from his position as acting director, delivers a final warning regarding the relentless nature of Kiyotaka's father. Before leaving, he offers Kiyotaka a handshake with his left hand. Sai Chabashira interrupts this gesture as a traditional symbol of remaining enemies until the end. However, Kiyotaka's analysis reveals a different layer of meaning. Drawing on Tsukishiro's background in the Boy Scouts, he notes that a left-handed handshake represents trust and respect in that specific culture, leaving a lingering ambiguity over Tsukishiro's true motives. Following this encounter, the emotional landscape of his school life shifts rapidly. On the deck at sunset, Ichinose Honami attempts to confess her romantic feelings to Kiyotaka. This vulnerable moment is directly interrupted by Miyami Nagumo, who exposes Kiyotaka's secret relationship with Kei to protect Ichinose's standing within the student council, causing a devastated Ichinose to flee in tears. As the summer break concludes, the students prepare to return to the dorms. Kiyotaka and Kei stand in their room, bracing themselves to reveal their relationship to the public. Kiyotaka kisses her twice by surprise, embracing her tightly as he reflects on the approaching second semester. He knows that to survive the impending shadow war against the White Room and his father, Kei must learn to stand on her own without a host, preparing her for the inevitable pain that lies ahead. The second semester of Ayanokoji Kiyotaka's second year at Advanced Nurturing High School transitions his strategy from passive self-defense to proactive, highly destructive manipulation. The illusion of high school as a peaceful sanctuary is permanently dismantled during this phase. To advance Class D standing, Kiyotaka is forced to make calculations that carry severe emotional and social costs, illustrating the cold, unyielding utility of his White Room programming. The unanimous vote special exam in Year 2 Volume 5 serves as the catalyst for this dark developmental shift. The exam requires the class to reach a unanimous consensus on 5 separate motions. The first 4 questions progress smoothly, but the final motion presents a brutal ultimatum. Will you expel a classmate to earn 100 class points? The class initially votes in overwhelming opposition to the call. However, the presence of Kushida Kikyo, who has holed herself up in a defensive yes to vote force the expulsion of either Horikita or Kiyotaka, brings the class to compete a standstill. To break this deadlock, Kiyotaka takes the floor. He systematically strips away Kushida's public facade, exposing her double life, her middle school past, and her secret collection of her classmates' personal lives. Placed in a corner, Kushida experiences a psychological break, spilling the class's deepest, most sensitive secrets and permanently destroying her social standing. In the midst of this social wreckage, Horikita Suzune makes a highly controversial and irrational decision. She refuses to expel Kushida, arguing that Kushida's academic and social capabilities are far too valuable to lose. Recognizing that Horikita's choice will cause the class to run out of time and suffer a devastating 300-point penalty, Kiyotaka steps forward to direct the culling process himself. He shields Horikita's leadership standing from the class's immediate wrath by identifying the most logical and efficient candidate for expulsion, Sakura Airi. The expulsion of Airi represents the literal shattering of Kiyotaka's sanctuary. Airi was the lowest performing student academically and physically, possessing few social connections outside of Ayanokoji's group. She was the easiest target to eliminate with minimal social resistance. Recognizing her own limitations and her deep feelings for Kiyotaka, Airi sacrifices herself, convincing her best friend, Hasebe Haruka, to cast the final vote for expulsion to save the class from the time penalty. This decision permanently destroys the Ayanokoji group, Kiyotaka's only space of uncalculated peaceful friendship. Airi's tearful farewell makeover and departure leave Haruka in a state of absolute vengeful despair. For Kiyotaka, this choice illustrates the ruthless supremacy of his utility-first mindset. He abandons a close friend with the same old observational detachment he applied to the subjects of the White Room, viewing her departure as a necessary mathematical variable to elevate the class's standing. The painful aftermath of this call is explored in the epilogue of Volume 5. Sai Chabashira summons Kiyotaka to the rooftop, sharing her own past trauma with the exact same exam, which had permanently ruined her chances of reaching Class A. By demonstrating his absolute clinical willingness to sacrifice his closest friend to secure victory, Kiyotaka liberates Chabashira from her decades of lingering regret. Recognizing his terrifying capability, she formally commits herself to fulfilling her duties as a teacher and leading her class to the top. Volume 6 explores the heavy psychological fallout of Airi's expulsion. Haruka and Akito Miyake remain absent from school, with Haruka openly plotting to sabotage the class's performance in the upcoming sports festival as an act of revenge against Horikita and Kiyotaka. Akito's protective love for Haruka, revealed in his prologue monologue, binds him to her path, forcing him to support her even as she threatens to destroy their own class. During the sports festival, Horikita's class takes first place through the athletic excellence of Suro and Onodera. Kiyotaka, however, remains completely in the shadows, utilizing this period of tension to observe Horikita's growing self-reliance. He refuses to intervene directly, letting the class experience the natural, painful friction of their choices. The cultural festival in Volume 7 brings the backstage battles of the second year to a violent climax. Horikita's class prepares a highly successful maid cafe called Mai Mai, with Kiyotaka acting behind the scenes as a manager. To maximize their sales, he leverages Chabashira's authority, convincing her to participate in a maid costume, which draws a massive crowd of adult guests and secures a second place finish for their class. Concurrently, Kiyotaka coordinates a multi-layered chronological trap to eliminate his primary right room rival, Takayagami of Class 1B, without ever entering the room. First, Ayanokoji coordinates the initial elements of the trap in advance, securing the contact details of the White Room agents. He engages with Ichika Amasawa, overcoming her physically and emotionally before directing her to wait near the student encounter room at 3 o'clock. He calculates that Ichika, possessing combat training comparable to Yagami's, is the only person capable of physically holding him. He expects her to intervene to save Yagami from destroying himself, driven by her protective, sibling-like affection for him. To establish the physical environment for the confrontation, Kiyotaka secures the cooperation of Miyabi Nagumo. He offers the student council president a highly desired future match in exchange for his participation. Nagumo must remain in the student council room at the designated hour and feign anger toward Yagami. Kiyotaka alters Horikita Suzune's schedule, ensuring her mandatory student council break aligns with the time Yagami is told to arrive. He tasks her with delivering the anonymous love letter, knowing she will execute the delivery during her scheduled break. The letter contains a calculated anagram that prompts Yagami to investigate. Kiyotaka coordinates the final external pressure. He informs Narase Tsubasa that Yagami was the individual responsible for injuring Komiya and Kinoshita on the island. Narase passes this information to Ryuuen, who instructs his classmates to accuse Yagami of the assault, pretending they recognize him even without concrete proof. To intensify the mental pressure, Kiyotaka sends Ibikumiyo and the instructor, Tomonari Mashima, to the student council room. This array of accusers is designed to disorient Yagami, preventing him from analyzing the situation calmly. The trap springs as Yagami enters the room. Confronted by Ryuuen, the teachers, and a hostile Nagumo, Yagami is met with seemingly insurmountable evidence. He suddenly deciphers the true message behind the elaborate setup. Kiyotaka considers him too weak to warrant a personal appearance. Enraged by this complete dismissal after a lifetime of striving to surpass his predecessor, Yagami loses his clinical composure. Believing his exposure is inevitable, he resorts to physical force, seeking to beat down anyone in his path to find Kiyotaka. As Yagami attempts to fight his way out, Ichika steps in to restrain him, fulfilling Kiyotaka's prediction. Before the physical altercation can escalate further, the White Room agents arrive, acting on the prior notification and forcibly escort the completely compromised Yagami off the campus. Through this sequence, Kiyotaka achieves the complete removal of his rival. The school trip to Hokkaido in Volume 8 provides a temporary reprieve from exams, allowing the students to experience a rare sense of normalcy. Kiyotaka is placed in a mixed group with Ryuuen, Kushida, and Kito, forcing him to actively manage the volatile friction within his team. Kushida, having her dark personality exposed, is forced to drop her perfect facade, beginning to develop a highly conflicted defensive attraction towards Kiyotaka after he saves her from Ryuen's threats. During the trip, the psychological focus shifts to Class B's Honami Ichinose. Her class is on a rapid, self-destructive downward trend, and her unrequited feelings for Kiyotaka have left her in a state of absolute despair. On the fourth day, Kiyotaka finds her shivering alone in the falling snow on a highwood deck. She is on the verge of surrendering her leadership and collapsing entirely under the weight of her failures. Kiyotaka steps forward and embraces her in the falling snow, pulling her close to give her his physical warmth. His action is a tactical preservation rather than an expression of romantic interest. Kiyotaka recognizes that if Ichinose collapses now, Class B will be completely destroyed, disrupting his long-term plans. He provides her with the courage to continue, telling her he will meet her on this exact day in 1 year to evaluate her class's future. By giving her a renewed, highly personal reason to fight, he ensures she remains a vital piece on the board, even as his internal calculations prepare for the day he will personally destroy her class. The final phase of Ayanokoji Kiyotaka's second year represents the ultimate culmination of his tactical powers and his clinical character writing. Throughout this period, his interventions transition from localized containment to a grand, long-term reconstruction of the school's power dynamics. Volume 9 opens under the shadow of Miyabi Nagumo's lingering hunger, as the student council president seeks a final battle to validate his strength. However, the political landscape shifts violently when Vice President Kiriyama attempts to stop Nagumo from squandering the third year's collective points. Kiriyama orders a framing of Fukaki Ryuuen for shoplifting, intentionally triggering Honami Ichinose's past trauma. The maneuver succeeds and deeply rattled Ichinose, who abruptly resigns from the student council and withdraws her candidacy for president. With the election neutralized, the 20 million point wager between Kiyotaka and Nagumo is rendered void, and Suzune Horikita is automatically elevated to student council president. To fill the vacant vice president seat, Horikita targets Kyo Kushida. Kiyotaka's contribution here is when he tells Horikita that Kushida must be shown concrete self-interest rather than appeals to goodwill. Horikita puts this into practice, offering Kushida the vice presidency alongside a high-stakes negotiation that leverages Kushida's need to rebuild her fractured social standing. The semester closes on the cooperative academic written test, pitting Horikita's class directly against Sakanagi's class A. The winning strategy is one that Suzune made all on her own. She staggers strong and weak students by testing order, smuggling instructions through the pre-planned hand signals in the brief second classmates pass each other at the door. By maximizing the point values of her lower performing students, Horikita's class edges out Sakanagi's without any help from Kiyotaka. Meanwhile, Ichinose reclaims her footing just long enough to lead Class D to victory over Ryuuen. In the background, Kiyotaka initiates a deliberate cold war with Kei Karuizawa by responding to her jealousy with analytical distance to test whether her psychological growth can survive real emotional uncertainty. Volume 9.5 complicates that experiment when Kei contracts seasonal influenza right before Christmas, cancelling their date and leaving Kiyotaka to spend winter break alone. His internal monologue during this period is rather dark, as he frames the manufactured emotional distance as a controlled test of whether Kei still requires him as a psychological host. When they reconcile on December 29th and he gives her a necklace, she embraces him in tears, believing their bond has healed. Yet, Kiyotaka's monologue reveals that his heart remains entirely unmoved. He feels zero romantic affection, explicitly viewing their relationship as an educational experiment in human dependency, calmly anticipating their eventual breakup as a tool to measure if he is capable of feeling heartbreak. Simultaneously, the ball begins to move around him. Masayoshi Hashimoto wiretraps a secret meeting organized by Class B's Maizono, who expresses deep distrust of Kiyotaka and begins investigating Kiyotaka as a hidden mastermind behind Horikita. Arisu Sakayanagi visits Kiyotaka's room, leading to a walk in the snow where she delivers an explicit romantic confession. She wants to disrupt his long-term plans to force him out of his cold stoicism and make him show genuine emotion. Next up, Volume 10 raises the stakes school-wide with the Survival and Elimination Special Exam. It's a 4-class rotation where classes take turns attacking and defending across 16 genres. Here, the story's core irony regarding Kiyotaka's character lands as a comedic yet revealing plot beat. Cornered by a pop culture prompt, the boy who was the mastermind behind many of the mind games we've seen so far is stumped when asked to define tapiru, which is teen slang for getting bubble tea, and gets it wrong. Horikita notes flatly that he understands less about the ordinary teenage world than she assumed, reinforcing the reality of his white room upbringing. He was engineered for total competence in everything except normal life. Elsewhere in the exam, Kushida's back-channel dirt on other classes becomes a primary tactical asset for Horikita. Meanwhile, Hashimoto's obsession with securing his own survival reaches a critical level. Because he believes Sakanagi's arrogant leadership will eventually ruin Class A, Hashimoto betrays his class by using a hidden proxy phone to leak real-time attack data directly to Ryuuen. Concurrently, Ichinose targets Kei Karuizawa on every turn of the second half, forcing Horikita to burn her protect slots and locking Class B into a predictable box. Through Hashimoto's sabotage and Ichinose's pressure, Ryuuen takes first place, while Sakanagi's Class A plunges into fourth. Forced to expel an eliminated student, Sakanagi institutes a blind lottery to avoid subjective bias. Seeing Miki Yamamura paralyzed by fear, Masumi Kamuro steps forward, draws the explosion slip herself, and leaves ANHS, forcing Arisu for once to confront genuine grief and promising to destroy the traitor who ruined them. Afterwards, Volume 11 moves the second years to a mountains mixed-grade exchange camp. The narrative weaves several minor threads. Horikita and Ibuki undergo physical training under Kiyotaka's instruction, fighting him while he uses one-handed aikido inside a small drawn circle. before taking a physical 2-on-1 rematch against Ichika Amasawa. Though they lose, Amasawa acknowledges their growth, deducing from their improvement that they were given a special training. Kiyotaka also navigates a wager with Nagumo, participating in 19 individual matches and narrowly defeating Amasawa in archery contest, with 58 to 57 points after he had trained and watched videos about it in advance. This makes him secure a 17-2 overall record. Away from the field, Kiyotaka helps Sakayanagi reconcile with the deeply insecure Yamamura. However, the true centerpiece of Volume 11 is the formal establishment of the Year 2 climax. Recognizing that Hashimoto's betrayal stems from a secret, volatile rivalry between Class A and Class C, Arisu and Ryuuen meet in the career consultation room alongside their homeroom teachers, Mashima and Sakagami. Together, they sign a binding, high-stakes dropout contract. The leader of whichever class loses the upcoming year-end special exam must voluntarily drop out of advanced nurturing high school. The year-end special exam in Volume 12 is a high-stakes, representative-based elimination battle structured around a werewolf-style dialogue game, complete with a traitor mechanic that allows representatives to accuse leaked spies for an instant point reward, or suffer immediate expulsion if the accused is innocent. In the matchup between Class B and Class D, Horikita steps in as Chuken middle, but is completely outmatched by Ichinose, whose terrifyingly heightened cognitive and observational skills leave Horikita completely overwhelmed. Defeated without dealing a single point of damage, Horikita breaks down crying in the hallway. Kiyotaka confronts her with a rare physical embrace, reassuring her before stepping into the room as Taisho, General, to face Ichinose. Sitting across from Ichinose, Kiyotaka recognizes that her observational talents make her genuinely dangerous. To neutralize her, he plays a ruthless game. He proposes a mutual agreement to eliminate the traitor mechanic early. Ichinose trusts him and designates Class B's traitor, Maizono. In the private dialogue room, Kiyotaka confronts Maizono over her leaks to Hashimoto. When she denies it, he cold-bloodedly executes the traitor claim, causing Maizono to be immediately expelled from the school. Returning to the match, Kiyotaka dismantles Ichinose's mental stability entirely and reveals that he was the true mastermind behind her shoplifting exposure a year prior, that he intentionally manipulated her romantic feelings for utility, and that every promise he ever made to her was a lie. Driven into severe cognitive shock, Ichinose suffers a complete mental breakdown. Her skills and drive all collapse, and Kiyotaka sweeps the remaining rounds effortlessly to secure victory for Class B. Simultaneously, Arisu and Ryuuen engage in a grueling duel. Because of Kiyotaka forcibly helping Arisu and stopping Ryuuen from using his advantages and typical tactics, Sakayanagi's strategy pushes the defenseless Ryuuen to the brink, leaving him with 1 life to her 5. Accepting his defeat, Ryuuen triggers a contingency left by Kiyotaka, and he selects Hashimoto's group and uses his traitor right on him, forcing a one-on-one dialogue between Hashimoto and Sakayanagi. During that dialogue, Sakayanagi deciphers the true meaning of Kiyotaka's hidden message. Ayanokoji is telling her, through Hashimoto, that he does not desire to face her in their 3rd year, but has instead engineered this stage for Ryuuen. Realizing that her lifelong dream of a final showdown with Kiyotaka is completely unrequited, Sakayanagi loses all motivation to remain at the school. In a quiet act of self-sabotage, she intentionally chooses not to accuse Hashimoto correctly, incurring a massive 5-life penalty that reduces her score to 0, throwing the match and surrendering her place at ANHS. The epilogue of the 2nd year with Volume 12.5 finally resolves the fallout of these shifts. Arisu quietly accepts her withdrawal, visiting Kamino at her new school and leaving behind a legacy for Class A, handed down through Morishita and Yamamura by Kiyotaka himself. On March 30th, Kiyotaka takes Kei Karuizawa on a date and formally breaks up with her in a karaoke room. He reiterates his core goal: she must learn to stand on her own feet without relying on him as a protective host. While Kei breaks down in tears, Kiyotaka walks away without looking back, looking, unfortunately, completely unbothered. That night, Kiyotaka visits Ichinose's dorm room, where she has been isolated in deep depression since her exam breakdown. He delivers a cold ultimatum. He will transfer to her class and guarantee their ascension to Class A, but only if she voluntarily expels herself, arguing her soft-hearted nature will hinder his leadership. Yet despite Ayanokoji's plan of only allowing 2 paths for her, Ichinose reaches a 3rd path. Refusing to abandon her classmates or drop out, She sheds her psychological weakness entirely, vows to fight alongside him as an equal, and reasserts her love, forcing an intimate, co-conspirator contract between them. She emerges the next day with a sharp, formidable composure that stuns her classmates. Concurrently, Kiyotaka neutralizes Chie Hoshinomiya's bitter grudge against Sai Chabashira by tricking Hoshinomiya into admitting her sabotage plans on a core secretly monitored by the faculty, forcing her to yield. On April 1st, Atsuomi Ayanokoji attends a parent-teacher conference, privately reaffirming his plans to place Kiyotaka in White Room leadership post-graduation, while initiating a massive political wager with President Koenji and Prime Minister Kijima. The final, earth-shattering turn occurs on the first day of the third year. Having accumulated 20 million private points, funded largely by Hashimoto and the desperate remnants of Class A, Kiyotaka executes his class transfer plan, which he had sown the seeds for a long time ago. However, because Sakayanagi's class finished in last place and lost their leader, they suffered a catastrophic 300 class point penalty, plunging them from the top straight down to Class 3D. Instead of joining Ichinose or remaining with Horikita, Kiyotaka subverts all expectations by stepping into the classroom of Class 3D, the class that was once Class 1A, and the same class that was led by the now gone Arisu Sakayanagi. His position now parallels how everything started back in the first year, by everyone already understanding the rules, and everyone is doing their all to graduate from Class A. Standing at the podium of his former rival's fallen class, Ayanokoji Kiyotaka positions himself at the very bottom of the school hierarchy, ready to act as the ultimate final antagonist against Horikita, Ichinose, and Ryuuen in their third and final year.